Yeah, and I finished on talking about revolution, and I was watching Gilles Heron the other day, and just explaining what his tune, "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised," means, and will not be televised, will not be televised, absolutely. And he explained that what he was actually saying was that the revolution cannot be televised because it's in our minds. That's where the revolution begins. And this space of hope is supposed to sort of inspire that sort of evolution. Okay, so we've been talking about hope. The government keeps, telling us that we've got to be optimistic. If we drill more oil, if we do, send more migrants away, things are going to be alright. We're going to be okay, and we say no. So sometimes we're faced with this quandary where we're faced with perhaps being optimistic on one hand and being totally pessimistic on the other hand. But then within the transition movements and transition towns, the transition town Brixton, we look around and we say, no, what we need is the power of just doing stuff. Let's get stuff done. And that's what Charlie was just talking about, sort of taking over that space. So, but then you say, what empirical evidence do we have for hope? When we look all around us, it seems like there isn't much really to hope for. But hope looks at all the evidence around as, but should I be optimistic? But hope says, no, I don't give a damn. I'm going to do it anyway, the power of just doing stuff. And that's what it's about here. Yeah. And now I want to invite a dear brother, as I said, co-founder of the transition movement, very inspiring person, inspiring speaker, and bonkers imagination, I have to say. But you'll see for yourself, I guess, during the talk. It gives me great pleasure to invite my dear brother, Rob Hopkins.
Good evening, Brixton. Lovely to see you all. Our friends who are standing here, there's a seat here, there's a seat here, there's a seat here, there's a few seats. Standing is optional. There are alternatives. You come and sit yourself down. There are some spaces of hope. But always a joy to be here with the wonderful Transition Brixton and to be in Brixton in general. Thank you all so much for coming out. Lovely to see you all. This is going to be an evening that's a bit kind of participatory. There'll be some things I'm going to get you to do as well. You don't just sit and listen to me for the whole time. I'm going to get you to do some things as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit, then get you to do some things, and we're going to go backwards and forwards like that. So I'm going to start just by putting a little bit of a context on the conversation that I want to have. And if you're thinking, oh God, it's Friday night and we've got to look at graphs, they'll be done in about a minute and a half. Don't worry, this is not lots of graphs, but just a couple that I think are really, really important, right? The first one is, this is like, ever since humanity emerged and got its act together, and since the beginning of the agricultural revolution, up until round about the time Van Gogh painted the sunflowers, something like that, humanity was in this kind of stable band of climate. We never went above 300 parts of CO2 per million. We had a pretty stable, kind of went up and down a little bit, it was pretty stable. That stable climate allowed human civilization to emerge. Everything that we associate with humanity emerged in that stable band of climate. Then we discovered fossil fuels. And the burning of fossil fuels over the last 150, 200 years has pushed us out of our safe space. And we are heading further and further and further out of that safe space. We've already gone up about 1.2, 1.3 degrees on pre-industrial levels. We're heading for like 2, 3 degrees. Absolutely catastrophic, insanely catastrophic. Our overarching need is to figure the ways to get back inside that safe space. And this is just the last, since 1940, just showing how that warming has just happened in these little sort of, they call in France, they call them camemberts. They're really quite nice, isn't it? And so the camemberts get hotter and hotter like this. And it's a story that is, we're talking about stories, it's a story that it's not going in a good direction. But we have to understand this. because we're living in a time where we have more people who are saying, oh, it's not a problem, and actually the science and the physics of this is something that we can't haggle with. And this is the last graph I'm going to show you, which is the Paris Agreement that we signed, the world signed in 2015, which is not perfect, right? It gave a 50% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees. Those aren't great odds. But actually what it committed us to was to the fact that it meant that by 2030, we needed to cut our emissions in half. Right? In the UK, the average footprint is about 9 tonnes a year. It means by 2030, 6 years' time, it needs to be 4.5. That's huge. So there's a real temptation. I talk about 2030 all the time. People say, oh God, that's not very far away now. So the temptation is to go, oh, don't worry, I'll tell you what, we'll say 2030. 2040, does that feel a bit easier? We're not here to haggle with physics, right? We can't push that date out because we have to come in within that line. So for me, the question is, how do we do that in a way that feels like we're moving towards something rather than being dragged away from something? How do we do it so that it feels like the beginning of something rather than feeling like the end of something? And of course, there's many, many other things. This is not just about climate change. Recently, last week, I think, there was the World Mental Health rankings were released. And you think, oh, well, the UK is going to be somewhere. The UK is at the bottom of this thing. Underneath, like, all sorts of places, like, we're down at the bottom of this thing. So we're trying to figure out, creatively, how we're going to manage, how we're going to reimagine everything, because that's what climate change demands of us, that we reimagine everything. How are we supposed to reimagine everything when this is the state that 14 years of austerity, etc., has put us into? So it's like we are faced with an imagination crisis, a poverty of the imagination, at the very time when we need to fundamentally reimagine everything. And that's really, really dangerous, I think. So recently the United Nations wrote a report, and they said any chance of staying under 1.5 degrees is now over unless we have what they called a rapid transformation of society. Sounds quite good, doesn't it, a rapid transformation of society? I quite fancy that. But actually, all the magazines, all the newspaper headlines just have stuff like this. Oh well, say goodbye, 1.5 is finished. It's like waking up in the night and smelling smoke and thinking, oh, I must call my insurance company. Where's the bit in the middle where you go, oh, maybe I should, go and get the hose pipe or do something about it. Do you know what I mean? It's like we just seem to just sort of go, oh well, and they're kind of getting warmer and warmer around us, and we're going, can't do anything about it. Actually, that's really, really dangerous, I think. So I love this. The Institute for the Future in America, on their window, they say, any useful statement about the future should at first seem ridiculous. I love it. I'm really here to urge you, please, if one takeaway you take from this evening is please to be more ridiculous in the activism that you do. I'm a great fan of the ridiculous. I spoke recently at a conference in Switzerland with 400 young people, all passionate about organic food and farming. The room full of them, you could feel this kind of, yes, this is the future, this is our North Star, we want our world of sustainable food and farming. And the guy who spoke before me was from the second biggest supermarket chain in Switzerland. 4 times in his talk he said, and I urge you to be pragmatic. And when it was my turn to speak, I said, please don't be pragmatic. The last thing the world needs is another generation of pragmatic people. Be more ridiculous, be bold, be audacious. Any idea that gets put forward for tackling the climate emergency now that doesn't seem at least a bit ridiculous is not ambitious enough. We've left this so late that the idea that we're going to solve this with little incremental, little cheap tweaks here, that was about 40 years ago. Now is the time for really, really bold and audacious and ridiculous things to take place. And this is, any of those of you who have ever been to Brussels, this is Grand Place in Brussels in the 1960s, full of cars. And if this guy here said, wouldn't this place be a bit nicer without all these cars? I reckon it'd be a lot nicer without all the cars. All these people around it would have gone, oh, that's ridiculous. What a ridiculous notion. It always had cars and it's always going to be full of cars. You go there today and it looks like this. Who was ridiculous? So many things that we say, oh, well, things don't change. I was remembering the other day when my eldest son is 30 and when my wife was pregnant with him, we went out to a cafe and the guy on the table next to us finished the dinner and lit up a fag and just smoked. And I turned around to him and I said, excuse me, can you see my wife's pregnant? He said, well, go to another table then. 3 years later, it changed, you couldn't smoke anymore. You'd go back to that. And that just changed very, very quickly. And so many of the things, it took 10 years from Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat on that bus to the Civil Rights Act being passed. 10 years from the first international sanctions on South Africa to the new constitution in South Africa. Things can change really quickly and we should never lose sight of that, I think. So a lot of the time people talk about utopia. I get often people say, oh, Rob Hopkins is very utopian, like a term of abuse. Just one down from kind of a bit airy-fairy, away with the clouds, that's all utopia. And I'm really not interested in utopias at all. What I'm really interested in is that 2030. What would that 2030 be like if we had done those things and we were halfway down and we could see the momentum that was building to go in the right direction towards something so much more delicious and exquisite and fascinating? What would that be like to be alive in that time? So I came up the other day from, I live in Totnes in Devon, famously twinned with Narnia. Our local poet laureate once said that if you lived there too long, your body started to secrete a new hormone called topnesterone, where your masculine and feminine came into perfect alignment with each other. But we're also the place where the transition movement started, and actually, and many other things. But what you might not know about Totnes is that we are the place in the world that has developed the world's first successful time travel program. Thank you very much. And so we deep underneath Totnes Castle, we have a laboratory. We've been working really hard for years, and we are the kind of the Cape Canaveral of time travel research. This is serious. If I don't win the Nobel Prize this year, I'm going to be really put out. So we're going to do a little bit of, we're going to make Brixton history tonight, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to be the first act of time travel that has taken place in this place. That doesn't happen every Friday, does it? So in order for that to work, and I see that you're all very well trained in the art of raising your hands, and then that means to be quiet, which is beautiful. I didn't have to teach you that. I would love it if you could make a pair with somebody that you didn't know when you arrived here this evening. You might need to move chairs, shuffle around. Oh, you're very good, you're very good. Not that good. Pretty good. Good big answer, thank you, fantastic. Has everybody got a partner? Put your hand up if you haven't got a partner. Okay, good. So, as I said, we have developed the world's first successful time machine. The first one that we built was kind of quite big. It was built on the chassis of an old school bus. And very effective, but actually after Brexit, getting an export license to take it abroad was just a nightmare. So we had to develop a new one that meant we could turn any space into a time machine, which is what I had brought along with me today. So I wonder if our friends at the back might just turn the lights off for this little bit. Some serious quantum shit going down here. And so I'm going to, so in a minute I'm going to turn this on. I've programmed it for that 2030, and I'm going to ask if you might close your eyes and feel the ground underneath your feet. And then, before we do that, actually, one thing I have to teach you is the noise a time machine makes. This is very, very important, otherwise it doesn't work. So the noise a time machine makes is this, but with you joining in as well. That was beautiful. I can feel the time-space continuum quivering. Okay, so if you might close your eyes, please. And in a moment I'm going to turn this on. And when we do, we're going to travel together to 2030. And it's not a utopia. It's also not a dystopia. It's the 2030 that resulted from us doing absolutely everything we could have possibly done in those 6 years. They were the most exhilarating years to live through. Things changed so quickly. It was just extraordinary. And when we arrive, we're just going to take a minute or two in silence. And in that time, take a walk around in the Brixton or wherever you've travelled here from today of 2030. But do it using all of your senses. What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What does it feel like? What does it look like? Okay, so let's turn on our time machine and travel to 2030. Keep your eyes closed and turn towards your partner. And we'll just take a couple of minutes to feed back with them. What did you see? What did you feel? What did you hear? How was that? Thank you so much. I've never quite figured out with that exercise. The keeping your eyes closed bit is really, really nice because it means you stay more in the space, but then you can't see the hands going up. So, yeah. Thank you all so much for doing that. It'd be really lovely just to hear a few shout-outs, a few impressions, even just like a few words.
Fresher air.
Fresher air.
Bird song.
Bird song, thank you.
Greener.
Clean water.
Clean water.
Food everywhere.
Food everywhere, sorry.
Exactly.
Insects.
Loads of space.
Loads of space.
Westminster.
Music, sorry.
Getting
Accent.
rid of Westminster.
Getting rid of Westminster.
Sharing, lots of sharing.
Lots of fixing going on.
Lots of fixing going on.
Everybody on bicycles.
Abolish capitalism.
Sorry?
Abolish capitalism.
I think it's abolish cannibalism. So, thank you. Sustainable energy, yes.
A 30-hour working week so everybody had the time to take part in this community.
Absolutely beautiful. Thank you. Yes, sir.
An affordable and happy life for people who don't look like people in this room.
Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you. Happy people.
People working locally.
People working locally.
Atlantic Road doesn't smell of blood.
Thank you. Do you want to just say that again? Don't feel
Atlantic Road, which is the street with lots of butchers on it, that doesn't smell permanently. It smells permanently of old blood. So,
Okay.
Atlantic Road, it doesn't smell of old blood.
That would be nice, wouldn't it? Doesn't feel like a lot to us. Thank you.
Less stuff.
Less stuff.
No private cars.
No private cars.
Nuts and fruit trees everywhere.
Nuts and fruit trees everywhere.
Tomatoes that taste like tomatoes.
Rewilding. Sorry, tomatoes.
That taste like tomatoes.
Tomatoes that taste like tomatoes. Thank you.
People aren't looking at their
Collective
phones.
care.
People not looking at their phones.
Collective care.
Collective care. Thank you. Beautiful.
Insulated homes.
Insulated homes.
No private property.
My daughter feeling brave enough to have children.
Your daughter feeling brave enough to have children.
Music.
Thank you so much.
Being
Music.
able to walk free education for young people.
Being able to walk barefoot anywhere, not down the street with all the blood. Yes.
Cargo bike jams.
Cargo bike jams.
Yeah, I said free education for young people.
Everyone.
Uni.
Thank you.
People-friendly buildings, buildings that are people-friendly, as opposed to designed so you can engage with them rather than oppressing you.
Thank you.
Maximum wage.
A maximum wage.
Less concrete.
Less concrete. Thank you so much. So this is an exercise that I do it with 10 people in a workshop. I've done it with 1,500 people in a hall. And what's really interesting is how similar the answers are. Nobody has ever said, oh, well, we have an IKEA that's 4 times bigger than the one we used to have. Or my iPhone 28 can give tattoos or something like that. It's like it taps in, because we live in an economy which is all about pleasure and dopamine and short releases of pleasure. And actually what that exercise does is it taps you into a future of contentment and happiness and what that would be like. And you might be wondering why I put you into a pair with someone you didn't know when you came here this evening. Well, we've just spent 2 years locked away in our houses not seeing anybody. We live in a time that is being called by sociologists an epidemic of loneliness. So even if this turns out to be the worst talk you ever went to in your life, you will know one person you didn't know before you came out tonight, and that's really important. And I've done that in my talks for years now, and so far I've had 4 couples who've come up to me and said, you know that thing you do at the beginning of your talks about how we met? And 1 baby.
Hey, bravo!
So be careful.
Hey, lights on,
Oh, there you are. Okay, so when I said earlier on that in my town we had built a time machine, you all thought I was joking. Actually, this is myself, my colleague Kit, and together we take regular trips to 2030 in our time machine using our incredible science that we have developed, and we travel there to make recordings and to take photographs. And so what I want to share with you this evening is actually a report of a recent trip that we took to 2030. So you might think of me as being like a sort of non-colonialist version of Marco Polo of the climate movement, who has travelled around and come back with extraordinary tales of what that future turned out to be like. So we started with our time machine on this street. I better turn this off actually, or dinosaurs start appearing and all sorts of great shit. We started with our time machine on this street, and we set the dial for 2030, and we pressed go, and a minute or 2 later we stepped out onto the same street, which now looks like this. Just in 6 years. Just in 6 years. And the first impression when we stepped out into that street was how lovely the air smelled like spring in the mountains, how loud the bird song was, but more importantly than that was a look in people's eyes. There was this look of, do you know what, I think we might just do this. There was this sense of hope and possibility that had been so absent back in 2024. And you saw the pictures of us in our time travel, our costumes. We don't wear these to protect ourselves. We wear these to protect the people in 2030, so we don't infect them with our despair. That we bring with us. Part of our training is that we are not allowed to do any past splaining. We can't go in and go, oh right, that's going to work, because they're on it. They are so on it in 2030, let me tell you. And so this street, and if you look the other way down that street, it looks like this.
No.
Yes. Oh yes. And all within this period of time, because what happened was that we cultivated the longing. The novelist Don DeLillo once said, longing on a large scale is what makes history. Longing on a large scale is what makes history. Never forget that. And who are the people in our culture who are good at creating longing? Are they climate scientists? Not really. Are they engineers? Not really. Are they climate activists? Occasionally. Are they artists?
Yeah.
Yes. Are they script writers, storytellers? Those are the people who cultivate longing. And so they were part of the reason why this shift happened. And my friends, the bicycle rush hours of 2030 were a joy to see. Every morning, every evening, this river of bicycles would flow in and out, thousands and thousands and thousands, because by 2030, we had built the infrastructure. And you may remember, back in 2024, you'd have these signs for cars when you drove into the city. Oh, you can go to this car parking space. 2030, they have them for bicycles. For some reason, they're all written in Dutch, I'm not quite sure. something happened in 2026 that nobody wanted to talk to me about. But regardless, we had built this incredible infrastructure, all those underground car parks we used to have back in the 2020s, you may remember those. We don't need them anymore because the number of cars has fallen so much. So they've been repurposed as these clean, safe, free spaces to leave your bicycle in the day, and if there's something wrong with it, someone will fix it in the day when you're at work, and then you whiz home on your bicycle. We built the infrastructure because we realised that for every £1 million we spent building good cycling infrastructure, we saved £19 million off the National Health Bill. It was not an expense, it was an investment in well-being and health, and that was one of the big shifts that happened. We started to look at economics in a very different way like that. Now most train stations you walk out of, this is what you see. Because again, we built the infrastructure, and it reminded me of back in 2023 when I went on holiday with my wife to Hopkins, and we saw this. And we looked at this for about 10 minutes. And if any of you here ride bicycles, and you can suggest what on earth you're supposed to do with
That wooden pole looks well played.
well, in the end, all we could think was that you were supposed to turn your bicycle upside down and glue it onto the street and leave it there. So back in the mid-2020s, we built rubbish cycling infrastructure because we didn't really care about it. By 2030, we built amazing cycling infrastructure, and guess what? People used it. Who knew? And you might remember back in the 2020s, cars got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. One of the changes that happened was that they started to get smaller and smaller and smaller. So there's a lot less cars now in our cities, but they're kind of like this, little sweet little things. Pootling about, doing their thing. None of that Chelsea tractor nonsense happening anymore. And the way that we build houses has really, really changed. So this is a place where the people who lived here had built the houses using straw, using local materials. So we had to move away from using concrete because the use of concrete and cement was responsible for 9% of all the carbon emissions in the world. And we were running out of sand, so we had to have a bit of a rethink. So this building was built using local timber, straw, clay. We built beautiful energy-efficient buildings using local materials, and it created a whole industry around our cities, processing those materials, and people could get involved in them because they were much nicer to use. And even now, when we build big buildings like this, we build them using timber, found new ways of using timber, revived British forests. A whole new industry has popped up, processing those materials to create apartments built out of wood, because we figured it out. Do you know what? Once we said, actually, there's a challenge here, we need to do something about it, we found that we were smarter than we might have imagined at the beginning. And when we walked around, me and Kit were walking about, you just would see things like this, just beauty in our lives, just because lives need beauty in them, rather than just sort of saying, oh, that's something, it's just, we don't need any of that. Our lives started to become more beautiful and art woven into it. This was a street that we went to visit, where the people on the street had got together and got that street closed to traffic. And they were very proud to show us a picture of what it had looked like before, back in 2024. And then they got together, and now it looks like this. And they have parties out here, and all sorts of stuff goes on. It's such a lovely space. And one of the things as well that they told us about was how in 2030, we've moved away from GDP as a measure of progress, because it was a stupid way of measuring progress. I'm a father, right? I have 4 sons. What we want our kids to do is to grow for a while. Growth is good for a little while. We want them to grow, ideally just slightly shorter than me. And then to grow in other ways, to become kinder and smarter and more skilled and more delightful to be around, that kind of stuff. If our kids, we just measured their success by the fact that they just grew and were bigger every year, it would be completely bonkers. So by 2030, we have a whole new set of indicators that we use. The number of children playing in the street, the number of girls able to cycle home on their own after dark, mental health indicators, important things like that. Anything else? What else might we measure if we were measuring good things?
Making music.
Making music.
People you spoke to who knew your name.
The number of conversations that we have.
How many neighbours you know?
The number of neighbours you know.
Laughing.
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 Oh, laughing. Yes. The number of food banks, as in a going down thing. Yes. Yes. Do you know, I was in Geneva last week. In Geneva, the municipality, there had a referendum in Geneva, and they've become the first place in the world to vote for there to be, for people who live there to have a right to a good diet. Everybody who lives there now has a right to a good diet. I was like, this is just fantastic. So that's in 2030, that's everywhere, of course. So, and this was one of the sites that gave me a lot of hope for the future, was the removal of concrete and tarmac. Because in our cities, when they get above 32, 33 degrees, concrete and tarmac kill people. It's really dangerous stuff to have around. And as our cities get hotter, it's very, very dangerous. So everywhere where we went, we saw this. By now, in London, the depaving industry is the biggest growth sector in the city. So the city feels so much softer. It can absorb more water. There's more space for insects and for plants as a result. And we visited this was a school. This is a photograph that was shown to us of a school playground back in 2024, and actually now it looks like this. And the same thing has been happening all across the city. This removal of concrete and tarmac has just been a joy to behold. And I've even bought back, honestly, this is, you are getting everything tonight here. I've bought back for you the front cover of Forbes magazine in 2030. I ripped it off the newsstand as I went past. I thought you needed to see this. This is the top jobs of 2030, because now young people leave school, they don't think, oh, I want to be Elon Musk, because that didn't end well. What they want to be is these are the new jobs. Everyone's aspiring to being a seaweed farmer, rooftop farmers, depavers, local bankers, ocean protectors, low-tech architects, seed keepers, imagination activists, mushroom farmers. This is what young people are coming out of school going, yeah, that's what I want to be, an ocean protector. That's me. Because the culture really started to change. And we visited whole neighbourhoods now that are designed with no space for cars. The cars are just being designed out completely. This place was incredible. And I went there because we wanted to make recordings that we could bring back and play to you of what that future would actually sound like. And we went to visit this place here, and I thought, well, I know what it'll sound like. It'll sound like bicycles and children in the streets. But when you go to visit a place like that, when you don't have the background noise of cars, you hear things that you didn't expect. I didn't expect that as we walked around, we'd be able to hear people having piano lessons in their houses. Never heard that before. When you get that volume down, you can hear all sorts of detail you otherwise wouldn't hear. And this place was just incredible. You'd see 3-year-old kids riding bicycles. Again, we built the infrastructure. We built things in a different way, and it enabled things to happen differently. And there is a car here. I did notice that. I think they just keep this one as a sort of educational thing for the kids. You know, like sometimes you go into pubs and have an old plough hanging off the ceiling. That sort of stuff. So they just kept, and also they grow really great courgettes in it. Really nice basil grows in there. But so I said I brought back recordings. I brought you back an actual recording from 2030. So this is actually a recording of what London sounds like in 2030. You'll hear children playing in the street, public transport. So you might like to close your eyes and imagine that you're somewhere in London when it's happening. Hopefully this is going to work. I feel a bit bad. I should have made a Brixton one with sound systems in the background. That's very much still a part of what that world sounds like. Yes, and our education system, and we made lots of recordings like that. And one of the lovely things was that our education system was very, very different in 2030. Testing in school was abolished in 2027, and education is now about critical thinking and imagination and kindness and things that are actually useful, and leaving school ready to really play your part in the climate emergency. And we visited this school, which is the newest school here in Brixton, which was designed by the kids. The kids worked with the architect for a year to design the school that they really, really wanted, and extraordinary thing. And it turns out that when you ask kids to design their own school, they say that it should have a rainforest in the middle. So I'm very pleased to announce that by 2030 the UK has reached its target of 66% of schools having a rainforest in the middle, and it's led to a huge increase in mental well-being in young people across the country. And the food and farming really changed. We realised that we couldn't just imagine that food and farming could carry on as it always had, because we were running out of water and different things. So our landscapes are now much more using agroforestry and permaculture, and we eat a much more varied diet as a result, and our landscapes have started to change and the biodiversity has started to come back. And you may remember in 2023, 2024, when we have floods, quite a lot of floods going on because of climate change, we don't have floods anymore by 2030. And do you know why? Because we developed the humility to recognise that beavers are much better hydrological engineers than human beings could ever be. So all those upland areas where all the water came from, we handed it over to the beavers. This was a wet field in 2024, and the beavers, completely free, you don't have to pay them anything, no national insurance, nothing. You just let them go, and they transformed into this. And the guy who showed us around, he said, when you have a pond, it's like a little bonfire of biodiversity. You put beavers in there, it's like you throw petrol on the fire, and the biodiversity just went absolutely mad. We sat by this pond, and you could see just fish jumping in and out and in and out, and birds, and it's just incredible. So that rewilding of those uplands really gathered pace and meant that we didn't see flooding anymore, because all that water was stored up there. Now we've seen a huge shift towards restorative justice in communities, so a lot of the defunding away from the police and going into supporting communities to do justice in different ways. And that, again, that model spread very, very quickly, moving money into communities rather than into the prison industrial complex. And universities really changed. So now every university course is taught through the lens of the climate and ecological emergency. And now when young people are choosing which university to go to, they look through the league tables, and actually what they're looking for is which university grows the most food on their campus. And so now every university is like this. The students learn to grow food, whatever course you're doing. And whenever a university needs a new building, students build it. Same with schools. And they build it using local ecological materials. This new classroom we went to visit used 1,500 old car tyres here in the retaining walls at the back. The hemp and lime blocks on the floor. The students grew the hemp on the campus, treated it on the campus, everything. So everybody's involved. It feels much more like they've got hands on. And the food system is almost unrecognisable. We went to visit this place where the municipality, because a lot of these things, it's not like it all just appeared out of nowhere. You could see this stuff, you could see the weak signals of this happening in 2024. It was already, there were things running. This was a place where the municipality had bought this land to grow food for the school dinners. And they now, in all the schools in this town are 100% organic, 70% and 80% by then is grown locally in this market garden that the municipality grew, the municipality started. Also the first town I've ever been to with a goth mayor. Seriously, really amazing hair and really sort of tight anyway. So he was very, very, very. So what they found in this place was that actually they can do it for the same cost because they produce 70% less food waste, which means they save 20% off the cost. The meals are 50% vegetarian; they save another 20% off. So they're at the same cost as the big companies like Serco and all these ghastly people who make shit school dinners for people, and they do it in a way like this. And this model just took off. And what they found in this town as well was that the culture came out of the school and into the whole community. People started eating better. So when you change the school models, those companies like Sodexo and Serco went out of business in 2028 because we didn't need them anymore. That's the year after BP and Shell went out of business. And I still have a hangover from the parties that we had at their demise, I have to say. And as well, like I said, so many of the things that were already in place. This is an amazing city in Belgium called Liège. And in Liège in 2014, the municipality, the community, the transition group, Liège en Transition, came together. They had a question. They said, what if in a generation's time, the majority of food eaten in Liège came from the land closest to Liège? What a beautiful question. They convened a big open space, invited everybody who cared about food. I went back 4 years later, 2018. By then, they had raised €5 million from local people to start 27 cooperatives in that city. 4 shops in the centre of the city, just the people getting on with it. No money, none of that money came from the council, none of that money came from the banks. They just got on with it. I met this guy who'd raised €2.5 million to start a cooperative vineyard. I said, how did you do that? What made you think that would work? And he looked at me a bit puzzled and he said, it's Belgium. People like wine. People have some money. Don't be afraid. So I always passed that advice on to people. He said, we had a good story. People wanted it to happen. By 2024, this model had now already spread to 6 other cities in Belgium. The municipality came in and said, this is amazing, how can we help? The municipality gave them €2 million to create a food logistics hub on the edge of the city. Now they're using this as the model to change how schools and universities and hospitals procure food. It's a profound shift going on that was started by the people in this place, and it could work anywhere. And last year, the mayor of Liège made me an honorary citizen of Liège. He gave me a medal, and I said, thank you, that's very kind. Could I have my European citizenship? I said, oh, it's beyond my powers, I'm afraid. But he said because actually everybody thought Liège was a bit shit before this happened, and now it's like you're an ambassador for Liège. You go around telling everyone how amazing it is. And actually this model is so important. And by 2030, this is every city is building a food belt around itself, because it makes so much sense. You reconnect the city to the land around the city, you create jobs, that money stays locally. This idea has just gone absolutely everywhere. And by 2030, the vast majority of energy consumed in the UK is now renewable, and the majority of it is owned by communities. As communities, we invest in and we own and we benefit from that energy. And this model has just absolutely spread all over the place. And do you know what? Back in 2024, there were people who said, oh, I don't know if we can do that. I think it's a bit difficult. We haven't got all the answers. We haven't got all the money. Maybe we shouldn't start until we figured out all the answers. So people would say, we had to get rid of gas boilers, right? Because we had to get air source heat pumps in instead, because they're much lower carbon. People said, but where are you going to put those on houses that have got hardly any space around them? Well, do you know what people figured out? Well, a lot of houses have chimneys. Why don't we make air source heat pumps the same shape as chimneys and just stick them on the roof? We found, as we went through it, that we were so much more brilliant and adaptable and creative than we gave ourselves credit for at the beginning. And it turned out to be the making of us rather than something that we wished we hadn't started. So, to step back for a moment to 2024. All of the stories that I've told you there already exist. As William Gibson, the science fiction writer, said, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. We're not waiting for someone to invent some magic thing that's going to do everything we need to do. It all already exists. What's missing is the longing, I would suggest. And so in a minute I want to talk a bit more about that. But all these places already exist. We started in a street in Amsterdam. The bicycle infrastructure is in Utrecht. If you want to have hope, we're talking about hope in this series, right? Go to Utrecht, sit by the main train station at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you'll see 33,000 bicycles cycle past you. It's awesome. The housing is in Leeds, the crazy school is in Madrid, not Brixton, sorry, but not yet, anyway. The beavers are in Cornwall, the street closed to cars is in Switzerland, the place I played you the recording from is in Germany, that university is in Liège. All these things already exist. We're not waiting for something new to be invented. So I want to do another little exercise with you now, where you're going to need your partner again. And this, you really need to look out for my hand for this, otherwise this is just absolute chaos. So look out for my hand, and this is an exercise that goes in 3 rounds, okay? And the scenario for each round is that with your partner, you're planning a picnic together. You're taking it in turns to make a suggestion for the picnic. So one of you might say, oh, I'll bring some sandwiches. And the role of the other person is to respond to that, okay? And then you swap over. It's like you're playing suggestions tennis, as it were, okay? So in this first round, the first person makes a suggestion. The role of the second person is to just drown that suggestion in as much negativity as you can. Okay? I'll bring I'm good at this, he says. So I'll bring some sandwiches. Last time I ate your sandwiches, I was in hospital for 6 months. And I swore I would never touch them ever again. Okay, and then you swap over, backwards and forwards. Look out for my hand. Off you go. Cool. Second round, it's the same thing. You're going to take it in turns making a suggestion for a picnic. This time the role of the second person is to accept that invitation, but with no enthusiasm at all. I'll bring a cake. Well, if you must, I suppose. Okay? Go. Thank you. I imagine that many of those of you who have been involved in activism in different ways over the years, those first two will feel really familiar. We just come up against yes but all, so yes but it's too late, yes but it's too expensive. But we tried that and it didn't work, all that sort of stuff. This last round, you're going to accept the other person's invitation and you're going to build on it. So you're going to allow yourself to create something ridiculous that can only exist because you do that. I'll bring some champagne. Yes, yes, yes. And we can open a champagne bar down by the river. Yes, yes. And we can invite Elton John to come and play the piano. Yes, yes. And we can build a rocket and shoot him into the sky or something. So you allow yourself to create something extraordinary because you listen to each other. Okay? Go. Okay. Sorry, I always hate having to interrupt that. I can just leave you doing that all night. And it's so beautiful to watch you when you do that. Because it's like the room fills up with laughter and bright eyes and connection and listening. And for me, it's like that's what this next 6 years needs to feel like. That yes and culture is what we need to build. It's this idea that somehow we're going to make the transformation we need in the time that we have, but it has to feel like a long walk home in the rain on a cold November Thursday, and it's always going to be bleak and miserable. It should feel like that. Put that in a bottle and take it home so you can open it whenever you need it, because that's what this really needs to feel like, I think. So what I want to do in the last bit of time I have with you is to just talk a little bit about what were some of the, how do we start doing things differently in 2024 that led us to that world. And I want to start by telling you one of my favourite stories, which comes from Zambia in 1964. So in Zambia, in 1964, Britain, Russia and America were competing, of course, to put the first man on the moon, huge amounts of money to try and make that happen. In Zambia, which had just become independent from many decades of British colonial rule, a man called Edward Makuka Unkoloso, who had been in the Zambian Liberation Army, announced the Zambian space program. He said, no, the first person on the moon is going to come from Zambia. He wrote letters to governments all around the world, said, please send me millions of dollars. Nobody sent him anything at all. And he took over an abandoned farm 11 miles from Lusaka, and he turned it into his space training centre. This is how he trained his astronauts for weightlessness in space. He would roll them down a hill in an empty oil truck. He always wore a cape for some reason that was never quite explained. And he also used to swing them on a rope. And then when they got really high on the rope, he would cut the rope so they would experience a momentary it would feel like, presumably before they then fell and hurt themselves really quite badly. He was very ambitious with our Edward. He was also planning a mission to Mars. They were going to take 2 cats and a missionary. And he did say, but I have warned the missionary, he must not force Christianity on the people of Mars if they do not want it. Which is nice. As you may have noticed, in the end, the first person on the moon didn't come from Zambia. And his space program lasted for about a year before it all kind of fell apart and people forgot about it. There's a clip on YouTube you can find of an ITV news crew going out to interview him, and at the end this awful, patronising British white reporter says, well, lots of people have said that Mr. Makuka Unkoloso is completely mad, and I have to say, having spent the afternoon with him, I am inclined to agree. So everyone had kind of forgotten about him. But when he died in 1989, he was buried as a national hero. He was buried with the highest honours the Zambian government could give to their citizens. Because what he did in that newly independent nation was open that space to say, why shouldn't the first person on the moon come from Zambia, actually? We're amazing. We can do whatever we want to do. And he was not afraid of being called ridiculous. To come back to that thing about ridiculous, we need to be the people who, when someone says, what a ridiculous idea, we say, well, thank you very much. Rather than the people who go, oh, I'll come back, I'll just pop off and come back with a more sensible one. Actually, no, I think Edwards was just the most beautiful, bold, visionary storyteller with a beautiful sense of the ridiculous. And I talked before about longing, and that we need artists to help us create longing. Artists can do that so beautifully. This is a guy called James Mackay at the University of Leeds who draws the future. This is what Brixton could look like if it became the most biodiverse neighbourhood in all of London. A picture like this, you could almost smell what that place would smell like. You could almost taste how that would be. If we take away space from cars, what are we going to do with that space? We give so much space to cars. If you go to Los Angeles, 2/3 of the surface area of Los Angeles is given over to cars. What a waste of space. So the picture like this, you can imagine our kids could walk to school down streets like this. Again, this is making this happen is the easy bit. It's the cultivating longing that takes the energy and the effort. I think like every organisation that has any ability to make things happen and to change things needs to be acting as if this is a climate emergency. This is a college in Copenhagen, in Denmark, who recently covered every square inch of its surface in solar panels. As a statement saying, this is a climate emergency, we're going to do what needs to be done. Everywhere needs to be acting in that way with that sense of urgency. And I think our activism started to change as well. This is Waterloo Bridge. Some of you were there, I'm sure, the first Extinction Rebellion in 2019, when Waterloo Bridge, normally full of cars, was turned into a forest for 8 days. Hundreds and hundreds of people arrested to keep that bridge as a forest. I know a lot about it because my wife was there for the whole thing. She's been arrested 7 times with Extinction Rebellion. I'm very, very proud of her. She's much braver than me. But I've met 4 people who worked near there and had to cross that bridge every day. And when it was like that, stopped on that bridge and went, oh, why can't it always be like this? And who gave up their jobs and who now work in climate change and sustainability stuff. I call that a pop-up tomorrow. It takes the future that you dreamt of when you closed your eyes and it brings it into the present and goes, here you are, nice, isn't it? What do you reckon? We could do more of this, couldn't we? And I think we need to be creating a lot more spaces like that, taking spaces over, turning them into giving people a taste of what the future could be like. The poet Rilke once said, the future must enter into you a long time before it happens. And we should never forget that in the activism that we do and in how we do it. And we need the really creative, playful things that bring people together. This is an amazing exercise developed by my friends Ruth Bentoven and Lucy Neal, created this amazing activity called Town Anywhere. We take a big space, you need between 200 and 400 people, you take that space, you do a time travelling exercise like we did, but then you follow it up by going, and what are you doing in that future? What's your role? What are you doing? Are you running a business? Are you running something? What's your role in that world? And then you literally build that world with cardboard and sticks and sticky tape and string and pens, and you build a 3-dimensional version of what you dreamed, and then you spend hours in it trading, talking to each other, celebrating, meeting. People build all kinds of extraordinary, beautiful creations like this. It's a kind of a rehearsal. It allows people to rehearse what they did. The first time we did this with the Battersea Arts Centre in 2012, when we had the first Transition Network conference there, 300, 400 people did this exercise. I ended up in a group of people who started a thing called the Yeast Collective, which was a brewery and a bakery in the same building. The 2030 is worth fighting for. It's definitely not that. And then the year later in my town, we started a brewery based off that momentum. And I met so many people who the thing they dreamed, the thing they played, they went on to create. Because the powerful thing about this work about imagining the future in a positive way, and it's really important, is that when you try to imagine the future, or when you remember the past, exactly the same networks in your brain kick in. It's exactly the same process that happens. When you're trying to imagine the future, you're basically going to the cupboards of your memory and looking through it and going, what happens if I put this together with this? And that's the imagination piece when you put things together. So if you just watch Fox News all day, it's really hard to imagine a low-carbon future because you've got no material to work with at all. Your cupboards are completely bare. So when you do an exercise like we did, when you imagined the future, you shared it with somebody else, you talked about it, you spoke it out loud, what happens is that you take what was a future imagining and it becomes a memory. So the next time you go to your memory to try and imagine, you've got that sparkly, bright, beautiful thing that you created together with other people. And this is such a fabulous example of that, I think. These are 2 of my great heroes. It's a woman called Rashida Phillips and an artist called Moore Mother, who together run a thing called Black Quantum Futurism. They're awesome. And they're based in North Philadelphia, in a neighborhood that's being rapidly gentrified, people being pushed out, communities of color in that neighborhood being pushed out by gentrification. And they use time travel as a way of talking about these issues in a really different way. They're beautiful. And they have this whole narrative about time, and that linear time has just been the end of so many things. And they took over an empty...
More Mother will be performing at the South Bank in May.
Fabulous. I saw her in Bristol about 3 weeks ago.
Yes.
It was extraordinary. Yeah. And so they took over an empty shop in their neighbourhood and turned it into what they called a community futures lab. And one of the things they do there is they collect people's oral futures and record those futures to play them back to people. I'm writing a book at the moment that's about time and how we can take a more fluid approach to time rather than just, we have a challenge in the present, we're campaigners, we campaign in the present. But what if we bring the past into that and the future into that and mix it up? There was a beautiful quote that Ella had about time and playing around with time, and it's so, so important. This is an amazing artist in Canada called Camille Turner, who says, well, everybody knows about the slave trade in the United States. People have kind of forgotten that in Canada they've kind of glossed over that bit of their history and painted themselves as being the good guys where people could run in order to be safe. And she says, it wasn't quite like that, actually. And so she's gone through the archives and found records of the 19 slave ships built on the Newfoundland coast, which is why there's no trees left on that coast. Adverts like this offering rewards for slaves that have run away, adverts for slave auctions. And what she does is she laminates all this archive stuff, puts it on the table in the room. When people arrive, they get given this magnifying glass that illuminates what's underneath. And they just get invited to familiarise themselves with that history, which nobody ever talks about. The really delightful bit about it, the project is called Afronautic Research Labs. So they have these people who are the Afronauts. And the story that's told about them is that they've come back from the future to witness this vital moment in time when humanity comes to terms with and understands and makes reparations for the slave trade. And they have this beautiful narrative to do with the Dogon people in Mali and how the Dogon people talked about there being another star behind Sirius that nobody could actually see. And then when we built the Hubble telescope, we found out that they were actually right and that there was another star behind Sirius, and they talked about that was where their ancestors came from. So in their story here, they say the Afronauts have come from Sirius B back to this time moment in history in order to, from the future, to help us understand the past. And I love that way that they're mixing the future and the present and the past. And their role is they don't say anything. They just bear silent witness to what's happening and allow that exploration to happen. It's beautiful. Just up the road in Camden has become the first local authority to work with Phoebe Tickell at Moral Imagination to design this imagination training for local authorities. Every organisation needs to create space to expand its sense of imagination, to exercise that imagination muscle, I think, is really, really important. And so far, in our conversation this evening, we've imagined the future. Imagination, visualization is a way of accessing the future. We've also talked about sound, the role of sound. But what about smell? Human beings can remember 10,000 smells and can attach emotions and memories to every one of those memories. In 2013, Nissan had released their Leaf electric car. And as a Christmas present for everyone who bought one, they made this air freshener where they commissioned a Dublin perfumer to create the smell of the future. What a ridiculous idea, like there's one smell of the future, like there's one smell of the present. And so they made this, which raised lots of questions about, well, actually, if you live near a factory that makes air fresheners, it doesn't really smell very nice. The right to smell nice air is not evenly distributed throughout society. But so it made me think, well, is there a way that we could use smell? So recently I was teaching some students, and after we had done the exercises that we've done, I gave them each a paper cup and said, go outside and make a cocktail of smells in that cup. You could go to the kitchen, you could go to the garden, you could go wherever. Make a cocktail of smells in that cup and give it a name like you would a cocktail. And then we had a cocktail party where everyone had to go around and smell them. And you got 45 different smells of what the future could smell like. Now, how do we find those ways that bring that future into the present that we're in? So I've been to the future we want. It was a slogan that I saw that a young woman had on a T-shirt at the Black Lives Matter protest in Washington, and it gave me goosebumps completely. And I thought, in the climate movement as well, like how different, just such a different approach. Rather than saying, we're going to talk about collapse and extinction, and that's going to motivate you to do stuff. Actually, I'm going to tell you, I've been to the future. It's incredible. This weekend, you'll be able to say to your friends, I've been to the future. Rob Hopkins took me there in his time machine at International House. Oh man, it was incredible. Let me tell you all about it. How different is that as an approach to what we do? And there's a beautiful quote that my dear friend Nick, sitting next to me, sent me from Mary Brown, who's a political theorist. She said, "Only a compelling vision of a less frightening and insecure future will recruit anyone to a progressive or revolutionary alternative future, or rouse apolitical citizens for the project of making that future. This vision must be seductive and exciting, and it must be embodied in seductive and exciting leadership and movements, hopefully oriented by an ethic of responsibility." Isn't that beautiful? So I want to just finish, and then we'll have some time for questions or whatever, by talking about Sun Ra. I love Sun Ra. Extraordinary jazz musician, 60s, 70s, 80s. He told an amazing story about himself. He said, I'm not a human being at all, actually. I'm an angel from Saturn. And I go to France quite a lot and do talks, usually with an interpreter because my French is terrible. And I did work with this one interpreter, and after 3 talks I realised that she was translating that as, he said he was an angel from Satan. So, which is a bit of a different meaning. He said he was an angel from Saturn and that he regularly travelled through space, and he used space travel as a different way of talking about black liberation, about black people travelling through space and discovering new constellations, and he was quite extraordinary. And he was also fascinated by the impossible. And he said, we've tried the possible and it failed. Now it's time to try the impossible. Because we're living in a time where all those things we're told are impossible, we know actually those are things we need to do. And all the things we're told are possible, like Brexit and economic growth on a finite planet, actually we know are the impossible things. So we need to seize the impossible back and take ownership of the impossible. Sun Ra, I wrote an article about Sun Ra called What Sun Ra Can Teach the Climate Movement. And somebody sent in a comment, they said, we booked Sun Ra and his band to come and play at our theatre in Brecon in Wales in the 1980s. And you know when bands are booked and they send their rider, like their list, we want like Jack Daniels and blue M&Ms or whatever backstage, that sort of stuff, sandwiches. The rider for Sun Ra's band said, you have to keep the 6 car parking spaces in front of the venue free so that his spaceship has somewhere to land. Isn't that fabulous? And I read a book about him that described him as being an everyday utopian. And like Sun Ra, and like black quantum futurism, they don't play it for laughs. It's not like a sort of Earth, Wind and Fire sort of camp kind of, we're traveling through space. It's like, no, we travel through space, we travel through time. And I love that kind of everyday utopianism, play it with a straight face. There's such a power to that, I think, that we could really learn from. So it's been a joy and a delight to spend Friday evening with you. If you want to find out anything else about what I do, I did until very recently a podcast called From What If to Watch What Next, which you can find on all those podcasting places. If you want to find out more about the transition movement, we have some people in the audience here who are very active in the transition movement in different neighbourhoods across London. Quick stand up from everybody involved in the transition movement in London. Heroes, thank you. This is a free guide you can find on the Transition Network website, an essential guide to doing transition, everything you need to know to get started. And we've just published something on my website, robhopkins.net, the other day, which is called the Ministry of Imagination Manifesto, which came from the podcast, because every bonus episode, we did this bonus thing called the Ministry of Imagination, where the guests would stay behind, and I'd inaugurate them as ministers of this imaginary Ministry of Imagination, and I'd ask them to give 3 policies that would rapidly accelerate our journey towards whatever it was we were talking about. And I stopped the podcast at episode 100, which meant I had 600 of these policies, and they were all brilliant, in a year when 49% of people on the world go to the polls in 64 countries, the most important year of elections, to vote on shit manifestos with no imagination in, I thought we should put all this together, and it's really beautiful. And you can find it and download it for nothing at robhopkins.net. So do that. And even if you read it, you might not agree with them all, but as you read it, what happens is you can just feel your sense of what's possible kind of being expanded. You find yourself going, yeah, we could do that, couldn't we actually? Well, we could do that. Why not? So thank you so much for your attention. Thank you.
Wow. So we're going to do the same thing, have some conversations, but just want to point out a couple of things. We've got some pamphlets outside on the reception desk. Please pick one up if you can. We've got some leaflets for our next in the series, which will be about the production of space, and we're looking at housing and community spaces. Again, leaflets outside if you can, please. And last but not least, we've got some copies of Rob's amazing book, From What Is to What If, there, and Rob will sign them for you. We're selling them at £11, I believe, so you get a whole 99p off. Complete with Rob's signature, of course. Anyway, so we can do that afterwards, but we're going to have some questions now.
I suppose one of the points that how I see it is it's more of a community thinking. You're thinking not about yourself, you're thinking about others and you and yourself in the others as well. So I suppose there's a little bit of a enhancing that sort of community thought process, isn't there? So you're thinking about not your house, you're thinking about your street. And did you pick that up in all these like Utrecht and all these places where you went, where there's a bit more sort of thinking outside their house, out their community thinking? Is it more group think, do you think?
I think
is it in this country maybe particularly?
I don't know. I mean, I guess there's often, like in Utrecht, I think they have a very different culture around cycling. But when we go to somewhere like Amsterdam and we see like this amazing cycling infrastructure they have, we somehow assume that's always been there and it's just in the culture. Actually, in the 70s, there were people who fought really hard for that to happen. There were kids who came out and blocked their streets to make that happen and took them back from cars. So often things that we look at now, we think, oh, well, it's always been like that, it must just be the culture. It's because people got out and made it happen. Yeah. So we should never lose sight of our ability to make those changes happen.
I remember being told in Amsterdam about the no smoking wizard. He was an anti-smoking campaigner, and he was one of the people who was key to the protests against the cars. And apparently they blocked roads with banners with slogans on, and then the authorities made the slogans illegal. They thought that was really clever. That was the way to stop the protest. So the next time they went out, they just blocked roads with banners with no words on. Right? Dick.
At risk of being too pragmatic, in your beautiful future, I wanted to ask you about disagreement and dissent and what your ideas are around it. And I am hopeful. But I have a woman in my street who, there's a tree that fell down in the storms a couple of years ago, and the woman whose house it's on front of hates trees. And we'd really like to replace the tree. There's a really nice set of trees on the street, but she hates the trees. She's a much older woman. She finds the trees irritating and a task.
Noisy.
and so there's that. And then I'm Irish, so I think there's a huge piece of imagination in allowing people with very radically different views to figure out ways to coexist and to be in the same location together. But it takes work, and it often requires very difficult compromises. So I wanted to really talk about dissent and disagreement in particular, like being allowed to disagree and hate trees in 2030.
Well, the first thing that I love in the question is the way, if there's the suspension of disbelief of like, when you were in 2030, did you see this? You know, I love that sort of, it's like, well, when you were in 2030, it's like saying, well, I heard you were in Paris last week, did you know any good cafes? You know, I love that. And I haven't actually been to 2030, just so it's... or maybe I have. I think that by 2030, yeah, we've like, so 2 of my kids went to a school that was a democratic school, where the kids had the power to hire teachers and fire teachers and change the school rules, and you think, that's going to be mayhem. Actually, the kids had to learn how to practice democracy. It was something they had to learn. If you were making a proposal, you weren't doing it on your own, you were doing it on behalf of the best interests of the community that you're part of. So they had to learn that from when they arrived in the school. I kind of imagine, when I imagine that 2030, it's a place where we've learned those skills because we had to work together more. We saw it during COVID in a sense, in that we had to build those mutual support networks ourselves because no one else was going to do it. And we had to figure that stuff out because we were in an emergency. What's coming down the line in terms of climate change is way, 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 way bigger than that. So I guess I would hope that either, firstly, in schools we start learning democracy in school, that we start learning democracy as a practice, because by 2030 we're members of so many co-ops. We're members of our local energy co-op, we're part of a food co-op, we're part of a housing co-op. You know, that kind of way of working together is much, much more. We need each other more, so we have to kind of figure that out and learn the art of compromise. I don't have like a magic thing I can say, and the secret to the art of compromise is, you know, because like you say, it's hard work. It's hard work. But by 2030 we've become a less individualised society and realise we need each other and we have to work together and we have to figure that stuff out.
Have you ever thought about changing your 2030? Like, that seems so unrealistic now to me in 2024. Have you ever thought about turning it to like 2100?
Well, no, and the reason for that was what I said at the beginning.
Yeah.
Because that's where we have to get to. So,
yeah, but we're probably...
We might do it down and then an up.
Yeah,
we might do it down and then up. It would be better if we got our act together and just did the down. Just did the up. Just did the, anyway. You know, because we could. You know, so there's like, when you build a time machine, and you find there's all these myriad of threads running off into the future. The future is always presented like as this one thing, it's always the future. The beautiful thing with Rashida Phillips and other people is the way they always write future with an S in brackets afterwards. Because there's not one future, there's loads and loads of them. And so for me it's like, yes, that future lies on the very outer edge of possibility, but it's still possible. It would require lots of changes and big things to happen. It would require a kind of Marshall Plan scale of funding and mobilisation to make it happen. But it is still possible if we want to make that future happen. So for me, it's like we need to talk about it and bring it into... And that's what I find, that time travel exercise that we did, don't let that be the only time you do that exercise. The more you do it, the more it comes into
2030
focus.
feels so close now. And I know there's a reason, there's the whole reason that was the target.
But also, that's not the finished article.
No.
So what I'm trying to share there is a world which is halfway there. It's a world that's on its way there. It hasn't done everything, but it's going in that direction in a way that's visible and that we can see. And I know that can happen because I've been to see it. If you go to the Vauban in Freiburg, biggest car-free neighbourhood in Europe, 3,000 people live there with no cars. They made that happen. We can do that if we choose to. Yes.
Hello. Okay. If some of us might feel that things are not possible, perhaps we should look at Gaza, flotilla in Gaza. Gaza is the ships that are sailing to Gaza. The people just took their own initiative. People from 30 different countries around the world just came together without the governments. They took the things in their hands and they just literally sailing, or they want to sail, they offer sailing to deliver the aid, American aid. We don't wait for our governments to give us permission to do it. We can just start taking things in our hands and start creating circles together. And start dreaming as well. Dreaming and then bring imagination.
Thank you.
Bell Hooks once said, "What we cannot imagine cannot come into being." And it's like that. We have that. And Marianne Kaba, who's an amazing prison abolition activist in the US, she says, "We imagine what we build, always both." You know, sometimes people imagine that somehow I'm suggesting we should all just sit around and dream all day. You know, we have to accompany that with doing things. Yes.
Yeah. So good evening, everyone. One thing that I was sort of wanted to touch on, I know the lady before me somewhat spoke about it when we were having to dissent and disagreement, and it's, you know, somewhat we might have a linear perspective of how our future will look like, and that might be sort of, you know, like embodied in, you know, London and the United Kingdom, but obviously as someone who's from or whose background is in the developed nation, how would the 2030, our ideal 2030, be conceptualizing developed nations and nations which perhaps we didn't see the seeds of such in the picture shown? How would their 2030s look like? Not necessarily and at the same time being obviously someone of like black heritage, you know, seeing and hearing the stories of sort of Afrofuturism and perhaps ideas of futurism in perhaps a broad perspective. How would, you know, neighborhoods of perhaps, you know, black or African background, perhaps the United Kingdom and the US or the developed world look like in a 2030, and then a 2030 that actually incorporates them in, you know, climate, perhaps an emergency that actually incorporates their ideals and their viewpoints, and it's not just perhaps idealism of university middle class students idealizing their own perhaps utopian futures. Yeah, that's essentially what I wanted to ask.
Thank you. Fabulous questions. And so one of the things, what I find really fascinating with Afrofuturism is how in a lot of places it's often seen as being about fashion and music and design and things like that. And actually Rashida Phillips and Black Quantum Futurism, they talk about Afrofuturism as a tool that you use in the community. They talk about we need Afrofuturist economics, Afrofuturist architecture, Afrofuturist legal practice, to bring that into all kinds of different disciplines, which is, I think, is brilliant. And the reason that I talk, when I do that about the global north and about here, is because the global north is responsible for this problem. So when we started the transition movement, the analysis was that actually the global north is up here in terms of its use of resources and energy, and we need to get down to here, and many places in the global south are here and need to be able to come up to a point where we can all be a kind of equal, sustainable thing. So what we were trying to design was like a detox for the global north, and if the global north is exporting this myth of progress and what constitutes progress around the world, then we need to model that and make that happen. So that's what's underpinned that. What would it look like in the global south? That's not for me to say, really, I think it would be a world where the kind of new colonialism that we see has been replaced, where we have land sovereignty, indigenous people have rights to access to their land. We see reparations being made for slavery. We see a different economy where land isn't being taken off people to grow roses to be sold in Marks and Spencer's in London. Actually, people have land security and they're growing to feed themselves rather than having to export to us. So it's a different model where we're building food resilience and community resilience and equity in both places, and reparations from here to make that happen and to support that in happening.
Got a question here and a question there and a question there. Thank you.
I just wanted to add a little bit is to watch Senegal, because they're really, making a big change and shift with the political choices at the moment. A lot of young people are choosing for young people to, really change around their colonial inputs from France and the States. But yeah, watch Senegal.
Watch Senegal.
Okay. Thank you. That was a really good presentation. I really enjoyed that. I think my question is how I think climate change is something that's collectively responsible as well as individual. And I wanted to know how do you stretch this to the working class communities, for instance? There's one thing that I personally noticed, maybe on the children in the streets, for instance, was a picture of 3 black kids. Whereas, how do we stop that from looking at the working class as something in need, rather than something that's responsible within the community that's a part of?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, thank you. There's an amazing place that I went to visit in France, which is called Grand Sainte, which is on the north near Dunkirk on the northwest coast. And in France, the mayors there have a lot of power to change things and make things happen. And they had a mayor, a guy called Damien Carême, and his whole philosophy was everything that we do to address the climate emergency has to be in service to the poorest people in this city first. So they introduced low energy street lighting in the city. LED street lighting saved €600,000 a year off the energy bills for the city. Rather than just pocketing that difference into the budget, they distributed that as an income boost to the poorest people in the city. When they made all the public transport free, all the social housing they were building was built to a passive house standard, so you could live in it with almost no energy bills at all. Around all the poorest housing, they took up all the concrete and tarmac so that people could create food gardens, and they had support and training in order to help to kind of grow food to support families as well. So everything that we do to address climate change should make life, there's so much to do, like should create so many jobs, so many opportunities, and if we get the right way around, then actually it benefits, we see the lives improving across the city. That's the way it needs to happen. I think we need to learn from the examples of what they did and apply that here.
Yeah.
Like a Green New Deal.
I think more what I'm saying is how do we encourage them to have climate change as a forefront. So, for instance, with myself, who did grow up in those working class communities, who was literally one of those black boys on the streets, I live in a council estate in the middle of a park. Now, before we got there, no one had plants, no one had any greenery. We changed the colours of our front door, added colours to various things, made plants, lots of plants everywhere, thanks forever. But what that did was the rest of the estate started putting up plants. Now we have a really colourful, really planty estate. So what I'm saying is how do we, rather than looking at those communities as, oh, we need to give them money, more social housing, more of this, how do we say, well, you're a part of the community and here's what we can do and let's do this together.
Yeah. I mean, I think you've answered it yourself.
Maybe so.
It's a beautiful example. Beautiful example. I was in, there's a play, I go to France quite a lot because they ask me to, I'm kind of weirdly better known in France than I am here because I was in the film anyway. And I went in Marseille in France, in the north of Marseille, which is very sort of the poorest neighbourhood in Marseille, lots of undocumented people living there, no jobs, no businesses will really go and open there. There was a beautiful story from there about how in 2014 the French government, in order to make some jobs there, paid McDonald's to open a McDonald's restaurant in the north of Marseille. Right? So they create 72 jobs, big McDonald's, and they pay them for 5 years. The French government subsidised this McDonald's. I use the word restaurant loosely, but restaurant. And then in 2019 the French government said, I think you're probably all right now. We've given you money for 5 years. And the McDonald's said, well, we'll close it then. And so they closed this restaurant and everybody got laid off just before COVID happened. And in that neighbourhood, the guy who I met there, who had been the manager there, he said people were much, much more at risk of dying from starvation than they were of dying from COVID here, because there was no work, there was no support networks for any people, and it was terrible. So there was this one guy, 72 people lost their jobs. The guy who was the manager kept the keys. He had the keys in his pocket. And then they went and they opened that building up again, and they turned it into a food bank. And they gave out 2,000 food parcels a week from that place. And after a year and a half, the municipality there said, you're brilliant, this is great, we'll buy you the building. So they bought the building and they've just opened it as what they call après-M. Which means after McDonald's. And they use the same letters that were McDonald's and changed them upside down. And it's still got the big M on it, après M, after McDonald's. And it's run as what they call like a social, it's like a social fast food. And somebody mentioned, I think in the questions before about actually growing food on estates. What they're doing then is they're saying, okay, we're going to be producing however many meals a day. We need salad to go in each of these meals we're serving. It could come from here, from the north of Marseille. We can train people. We've got all this grass around that nobody is that bothered about. We could train people like this. Could become like the salad bowl of Marseille in these neighbourhoods. But it's run by the people in those neighbourhoods. They just got themselves together, mobilised. It's triggered all sorts of amazing other things. So those are the kind of stories that I look for and sort of share around the place.
Yeah, and then here, and then I don't know.
There's another one.
Oh right, I'm should be sacked. I can't keep up.
Oh, I think there was there first.
Oh.
Hello. So my name's Sabine and I live on the central estate that's facing demolition. So I know we're imagining what if, which I don't know if I'm autistic. I'm not the greatest, but I just want to show like a really pragmatic dystopian world that is actually Lambeth Council. So I just thought, like in a room full of people potentially based in Lambeth, that a lot of support is needed for the disadvantaged communities. They're quite deliberately kind of disempowered from decision making and franchise of their own estates, their own land around them. There are, like, I look at Central Estate and we used to have, and we probably still do, have a lot of fly tipping, and I think, well, if you're looking how the community outside the estate uses our estate, you think, well, part of it is they dump their rubbish. So you kind of think, how could that be turned into, like, we separate the rubbish out and we become a mini, I don't know, landfill, because the proper places you're supposed to dump at are actually Fort Knox, 5 cameras, but our estate, that's an easy picking. But I don't just mean that. I mean, people park their cars on our estate, people play in the play area. So you kind of feel like how there is this kind of symbiotic relationship with what happens outside the estate and on the estate. But in terms of actual management, the trees are cut down, maybe they're getting old, maybe they're about to fall over. I, as part of the community, can't go and just plant some trees in the space of land in front of me. So I just wanted to throw it out there. I don't mean to be a cold bucket of water, but it's icy cold from the estate I live on.
I'm just going to say, I'm the tree planting officer in Lambeth. We're planting 5,000 trees in Lambeth.
Try and get one on Central Hill.
I will. I'll see.
Try and get one.
But we're planting a lot of trees on estates, and I'm going to estates, and we're trying to plant fruit trees.
I don't just get into solar panels.
You guys need to talk to
It
each other.
fits with the question. I wanted to say that.
It's not just trees though, it's not just trees. It's access to community space. We can't get a food hub on our estate. We can't get salsa classes, even if someone wants to give them for free. We can't do any plant. Well, we can plant. No,
Even the playing area was cut down by Lambeth.
Yeah, but the trees do that. Yeah. But I'm saying it's not free. I can't just plant.
I think a lot of the things on estates is there's a lot of expectation that people on estates are going to kind of utilise their space, but a lot of people on estates are just getting by with bringing up their kids. We need more investment.
Let me ask my question.
Okay, sorry. Very quickly, we need to wrap up soon, unfortunately. Just 1 second. 1 second, and then please. We need to wrap up soon. So please hold that. Our next session on the 7th of June is exactly about that sort of thing, the production of space, our communities produce space, for them. So we will come back to that. So Charlie, I think we've got like 3 questions. Can we get them all very quickly?
Okay, really quick.
But related to what Sabine is just saying, and what I'd ask you is, we are dealing with Lambeth Council. In Brixton, we're dealing with Lambeth Council. And those people sign up for climate change, so they're saying that we have a climate assembly even, but they're not actually making any changes. They're actually still demolishing the estates and having a tree officer and saying they're doing good things and they're not. Would you, or are you able, or shall we organise you going to talk to Lambeth Council?
I'm Rope's agent, by the way.
Always happy to do that.
I'm really glad actually that you mentioned the council, and particularly Lambeth Council, which is infamously terrible at a whole number of things, housing being one of the critical ones. So, I mean, in terms of poverty in local government, local authorities, if you're homeless, your first point of contact is your local council. Councils are so integral to the function of a community, particularly if because what we're seeing now with councils up and down the country, especially in London, is them going bankrupt. So how do you, as an advocate, how are you sort of negotiating your work with, or what's your sort of interaction with councils and with, I mean, I guess what I'm asking is kind of very broad, but the main point I was saying is when it comes to councils, there's just a complete ineptitude to deal with a number of essential, not to say that climate justice and sort of living a cleaner, safer area isn't essential, but we're talking councils failing at basic necessities for local residents, such as housing, adequate housing, providing housing. So how do you plan to incorporate or negotiate your work with local councils, at least looking at climate justice within local authorities, local communities? So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I would say so. So the main thing. So I don't go around the country like working with local authorities. I kind of go where I get invited, really, and I don't get invited into local authorities. So I don't have a lot of stories about, well, I visited the council, I went in and I kicked them up the arse and now they did this. But I can tell you a story from my town, which is where we have the last big employer in our town was Dairy Crest, a big milk factory, employed 170 people. It was the last big employer in the town, closed in 2007, and from the day that it closed, the community started to mobilise to become the developer of that site, inspired by Coin Street Community Buildings on the South Bank, which is the most amazing example of a community who began by fighting commercial developers encroaching into the neighbourhood to build what nobody wanted, and then they decided, well, actually we'll become the developers. And Coin Street is amazing in that, affordable housing in an area where they're surrounded by like $5 grand a month apartments.
But it's still having huge impact on the tenancies there. There's a lot of dissent.
This wasn't at all defence of the state at all. I mean, I was just sort of talking when Lambeth was brought up, I just thought it'd be an important thing to kind of bring in council measures. I mean, a lot of the stuff that they do in their green initiatives are literally gimmicks or like one-dimensional interventions in really what needs to be proper sort of material benefactors for local people. So I was just wondering how it was kind of negotiate that in terms of working class people and it being impactful, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
I think a lot of, particularly Extinction Rebellion, I think they've decolonised a lot more than, say, a couple of years ago when they just came out. I think it's a lot more integral now with working class and colours of communities, which is fantastic. But, when it comes to sort of groundwork, not to say, there's working class people almost an afterthought often when it comes to climate justice. So, not a defence of the state, but I'm saying sort of how would you have negotiated work?
So I mean, the work that I do around this tends to be around imagination work within municipalities. So I tend to get invited in to try and sort of stretch their sense of what's possible. But again, most of I go where I get asked to do that, and no London authorities have asked me to do that.
Not surprised.
So I don't have a kind of a magic answer to that.
Can I just suggest that one of the things that we do collectively is find the people in the council who are going to ask you to invite you to come and do that, because that might be really powerful. We have a council that is banging on about 2030 and climate justice, so that possibly is something that we can do.
Sure.
Get you an invitation if you're
I'd love to, yeah.
We'll take it. Brilliant.
I mean, there's an awful lot of the sort of backsliding on all those places that declared a climate emergency 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. The government, all these that are just sort of going, yeah, well, like, and backtracking from all that stuff and the kind of behaviour that you're talking about. So
I think Lambeth has, so I've always historically worked outside the council and I've just started working inside it. So it's quite interesting seeing both sides of it, but I think you're really right about social justice and housing and all of these issues.
London has the worst quality of housing. I mean, in entire counting all the boroughs in London, it has the worst quality of housing, providing housing quality for social housing tenants. So it's like
it's an interesting kind of. But I'd say Lambeth is good. We're one of the only 2 boroughs that don't use herbicides on our streets. So you might know Lambeth is quite fluffy if you walk around it with loads of weeds everywhere, which also has impact on people's emotional well-being, because it doesn't actually make people feel very good. So it's quite a complex dynamic, the shift.
So I would just like, so just to finish off the story that I started telling you in my town, the point of that is we've been working for years against the land, the whole world of land and developers and property who are just like the worst, awful, dreadful people. And so we've been fighting for the community to become the developer of that site for all that time. We just had a public inquiry, which if we win it, what's going to happen is our local council is going to compulsorily purchase that land so the community can become the developer on that site. So there is something really powerful, and there are examples, and Cooperatives UK and the New Economics Foundation and Power to Change support communities becoming their own developers. If the council aren't doing it, then there are models whereby communities can mobilise themselves and become their own owners and developers.
Sorry, I promise this is the last thing I'm going to say, but you are from Devon, and the majority of land, I mean, a lot of land is privately owned in the UK, whether it's, I mean, the upper classes, the aristocracy own a massive percentage of land, which inhibits community involvement, or inhibits greater access for, But so I was just going to say again, that's probably something we've looked at as well.
Yeah, totally. But actually, there's also brownfield sites up and down the country. There's brownfield sites, and nobody knows what to do with them. If we have little changes to how things work, communities can take them, design them. That's what we're trying to prove and set a precedent for in our town. And it's hard work, but it'll be a lot easier for people who come after us.
And that sounds like a perfect segue into Spaces of Hope #2, which happens
Don't miss it.
In this building, maybe not in this space, but in this building on the 7th of June. So Rob might not be able to come back, but we all can. And I hope we all do, because I think we've established that there's a lot of unfinished conversations, a lot of work to do. I can't believe the woman from the council has gone, because she's going to tell everybody that we're going to go and invade that space over the road. We've got to do that as well. So thank you, Rob,